Speaking of,
I was about to say, here's another one. Yep.
Yeah, speaking of another band, it's a British band. It's the Verve and Urban Hymns. In the opening montage, you are hearing the song that you probably are familiar with, Bittersweet Symphony, and now you're going to hear Lucky Man.
Well, I'm a lucky man with fire in my hands.
Okay, Matt, what are the stats?
Urban Hymns by the Verve comes in at number 58 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 7 in 1997, number 305 of all time, did not make Rolling Stone's list, and the Verve is ranked number 255 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
This was a band that had an inordinate amount of information on Wikipedia, compared to the band. I was shocked about how much in depth it was.
Doesn't surprise me, actually.
So
yeah. Oh my God, look at this
album.
thing. Yeah.
This album came out.
War and Peace up in here. Holy crap.
Came out September 29th, 1997. They are an English rock band. They formed in Wigan in 1990 by lead vocalist Richard Ashcroft, guitarist Nick McCabe, drummer Peter Salisbury, and bassist Simon Jones. Simon Tong, who appears on this album, also plays guitar and keyboards. He later took over for for Simon Jones, I believe, or the drummer, one of the other guys. This is their third of only 4 albums. The band has broken up and reunited many times, but this is going to be one of the bands that I believe actually stays broken up. I'll get to that in a bit. The band broke up in 1999, and they actually broke up in 1996 before this album came out as well. Genres are Britpop, neo-psychedelia, are alt-rock, and shoegaze. Early on, they were a shoegaze band in some of their early albums. Influences, well, pretty much the greatest hits of CTS. We've got the Rolling Stones, Jesus and Mary Chain, the Smiths, Stone Roses, My Bloody Valentine, Echo and the Bunnymen, and Velvet Underground, of course, and the Beatles, obviously. Similar artists, Travis, Kula Shaker, Suede, Pulp, Oasis, and Coldplay. This album reached 23 on the Billboard 200, and Bittersweet Symphony reached 12 on the Hot 100. And some fun facts. Their first album, A Storm in Heaven, came out in 1993. At that time, they played many gigs with Oasis before Oasis became, as big as they were. And they also opened for Smashing Pumpkins on their Siamese Dream European leg of their tour. They played in Lollapalooza in 94, and Richard Ashcroft later recalled, quote, "At the start, it was an adventure, but America nearly killed us," because they were doing the rock star life with a lot of drinking and destroying of hotel rooms and things like that. Their second album, A Northern Soul, came out in 1995, but Ashcroft broke up the band that year, shortly after it came out, and then they reunited. He reunited with some of the band members a few weeks later after the breakup, but the band made no live appearances in 96, and basically kind of worked on this album. I feel like, based on what I read, Richard Ashcroft is kind of the driving force of the Verve, and wrote most of the songs and came up with most of the ideas, and then basically begrudgingly added band members because he needed people to play instruments and add some. Some of the other band members definitely added stuff to the band. I don't want to take credit away from them, but I feel like Ashcroft is kind of the creative driving force of it. The band. So the process for recording Urban Hymns took a really long time, most of 96, and Ashcroft and the reunited band worked on material all throughout 96 to eventually make Urban Hymns. And then in April 99, the band split up again, and they basically stayed. They reunited in 2007 after that split up 99, and they released a final album titled Forth, Forth, which was their fourth album, and in 2008, and then they subsequently broke up again and haven't reunited since, and have really shown no interest in reuniting. Richard Ashcroft has said that you're more likely to see the Beatles reunite than us, and he seems to be doing solo work.
I don't
and stuff
think
like
that's
that.
I don't think that's true.
Right. Well, that was like during the third time they broke up, not this most recent time. So I don't know. Maybe I think George Harrison might still have been alive then. But anyway, and most famously around Bittersweet Symphony, the tale of the songwriting credits and the legal battles around that. Do you guys know that story? Do you want me to go in depth on that story? I have a lot of notes about it.
I definitely know the story. I think we've probably talked
I
about
know
it
too,
here and
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But go up.
I'll kind of
say what you will, Josh.
Yeah. So Bittersweet Symphony contains a sample from an orchestral version of the 1965 Rolling Stones song "The Last Time" that was done by Andrew Oldham Orchestra, which is a side project of Andrew Logue Oldham, who was the Rolling Stones' original manager and producer. And so
I remember he was a wild guy too. Remember that? We did the bios, yeah.
And so the Verve took a sample from this, not like knowingly took the sample and asked for the rights to use the sample, and they added guitars and strings and vocals and percussion over the sample. If the sample's on YouTube, it's you can hear it. It sounds almost exactly like the basis of this song. And so, Richard Ashcroft heard this original version, liked it, sampled it, and looped 4 bars from the song. And then the record label, Virgin Records, acquired permission to use the sample from Decca Records, who owned the recording. However, that they did not obtain permission from the Rolling Stones manager, Alan Klein, who is the head of ABCO Records, who owned the composition rights to this version. And so then when Bittersweet Symphony was about to be released as a single, Klein refused clearance for the sample and saying the Verve had used a larger portion than they had agreed upon, or, it sounded too much like the original or whatever. And so then Virgin Records played it for Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, but they said they liked it, but they didn't want to get involved. So they weren't really like in the legal part of it. And so following a lawsuit, the Verve had to relinquish all their royalties to Klein, and the songwriting credits were changed to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. And so then Ashcroft received $1,000 and, gave up all the royalties for the biggest song of their career and, in continuation. And then his co-manager, John Kennedy, described it as one of the toughest deals in music history. And according to the Verve's bassist, Simon Jones, the Verve were told they would be given half the royalties, but when the single began selling well, they were instructed to relinquish 100% of the royalties or remove it from sale. And then Rolling Stone magazine wrote that the outcome was patently absurd and noted that Jagger and Richards were not involved with the sample or Ashcroft's melody or lyrics. So even though they were credited as songwriters, they really had nothing to do with it. Fortunately, in 2019, after Alan Klein has died, his son had taken over the business or rights that he was, in charge of. They made a deal. In April 2019, ABCO, Jagger, Richards, and Richard Ashcroft agreed to return the Bittersweet Symphony royalties and songwriting credits to Ashcroft. Billboard had estimated that Bittersweet Symphony had generated almost $5 million in publishing revenue that was lost to him, to Richard Ashcroft and the band. And Ashcroft said at the time, once it was returned, that it was a kind and magnanimous move, and said, quote, "I never had a personal beef with the Stones. They've always been the greatest rock and roll band in the world. It's been a fantastic development. It's a life affirming in a way." So kind of a bittersweet note to end on after the band.
It wasn't even that. It was all
a
Alan
bittersweet
Klein.
Symphony.
Yes.
It was all Alan Klein, that
I know.
freaking guy.
He
was
really caused
shrewd.
all the problems. I always didn't know the full story. I always thought it was the Rolling Stones and him and that kind of a basic version of that.
Yeah,
but
no.
Interesting to know kind of the ins and outs and the legal ramifications, as we've documented throughout many bands' career, getting screwed over or things like that. But anyway, that was a long-winded way of saying the Verve. This third album was a big, massive hit, that song in particular. And so let's go with John. What did you think of listening to the Verve this time in Urban Hymns?
This was an interesting one for me, guys, in that there's so many elements of what they're doing that on paper feel like they should totally work for me. But it just never seems to totally come together for me. And I think the reason is this album is just so big and ambitious, I feel like at times, even when it doesn't need to be as big. I never get a break, right? It was overwhelming to me, this album. I feel like the grandeur and the bigness of this album. And I think it would have really benefited from a few songs where you take a deep breath, I'd say, but everything feels like they're trying to write the single most profound song ever. And while I like this album musically quite a bit, I do think there was a piece of that bigness of it that kept me at a distance, I'd say, in terms of how I felt about the album. The song, when I was like, I listened to this without having any idea of what the plays of the songs would be, right? But obviously I knew Bittersweet Symphony would have a bajillion, right? And I've always liked but not loved Bittersweet Symphony as a song. I appreciated what they were doing, but I don't know. It only... I would, after listening to this album, I would say Bittersweet Symphony as a song is how I felt about this album in entirety, in that I like it, but I don't love it. And I like pieces of it quite a bit, and other pieces of it feel too long or grandiose after a while. Like, that's how I've always felt about that song. The other songs that I said I liked were Sonnet and The Drugs Don't Work and Lucky Man, right? Were the other ones I wrote down. And then I came to Spotify and I'm like, these songs are by far the ones that are the most plays. I'm like, well, me and everybody, I guess,
they were
are
also
doing
the
it.
singles. That's the same thing I went through also. Yeah.
Yeah, and they clearly are too. Like when you listen to them. And it's some of the other songs, it's not so much the other songs that aren't singles are not good songs. In fact, there's a song like Weeping Willow I liked, and Velvet Morning, right, were other good songs that I enjoyed quite a bit, but those other songs had like a bigness to them that I felt like, well, these are clearly the singles or the grabs for it. And I think that was kind of my lasting legacy was I listened to this album 3 times to see if I had what happened with the Blur album, right, where each time I listened to it, I kind of liked it more, right? And I felt like that was going to be how I felt about this one, but instead I got kind of the feeling of what it feels like when U2 or somebody or how I always feel when I listen to Queen, that like the bigness of the album kind of overwhelms my ability to make a connection to it. And so I more like it and admire it from far than I feel like I want to like jump in and own it or feel a part of it, if that makes sense. So I feel like I'm sounding more negative on this album than I was. I still think this is trending in the direction of thumbs up. I think I was just a little disappointed that I didn't like this album more than I did, if I'm being honest. I have other thoughts on this one, but every once in a while, I'm not going to say that I'm punting on this one, but every once in a while, I like to listen to the two of your take on. I always like to listen to the take on an album. Let me amend that, but I like to listen to it in the sense of I think it will give me a better discussion piece to jump off of with what you guys bring to the table. And if you don't mind, I might weave in with questions or follow-ups if you don't mind to yours. But I'm very curious as to how you guys felt about this album.
Well, I hate to burst your bubble here, John, but my take is very similar to yours, actually.
Oh, okay.
As soon as you started talking, I'm like, we're going to have the same freaking take. I'll throw some little
I am also the same way.
All right, here we go. Yeah.
Interesting. And we don't talk about these things ahead of time.
No,
so,
we don't.
Yeah.
Were either of you guys familiar with this record before today or before this week?
I only knew that.
No.
Just to say,
and I think it's because of how I felt about that single, that it was like I liked it but didn't love it enough to explore. Yeah.
Okay. So I do own this record, but I kind of got it later. I different than you, John. I've always liked Bittersweet Symphony. As soon as I heard, I'm like, what a freaking cool song.
Okay.
Like, I just like that. It's like almost 6 minutes. It's a little long, but I don't care. That's a song that like I listened to a ton of times. I've never gotten sick of it. I really do like that. He was on to something when he picked up on that sample. It was like, I'm going to make something out of this. And I think that he did a really good job with that. But I never bought the record. And I think this is like an album I think I got. I don't know if you guys ever had this experience where you were like in the mall somewhere. There's some record store. There's some like, Sam Goody or what's going out of business, and they have like just like racks of like CDs, and like some of them are used, and that they're just like, oh, everything must go. And so like I think I bought this in that type of environment. Like, oh, Bittersweet Symphony I can get for $3. Like give me that. Or not Bittersweet, but the album. And so I listened to it, and there's songs on it. Like, to me, the best two songs are the first two songs. I think Bittersweet Symphony is an excellent song, and I think Sonnet is a really that chorus of that song is excellent. It's really I really connect with, and the rest of the album is very good. As like you said, John, on paper, this is an album that I should love. Like, this has lots of very melodic, it's got great ballads on it. It's got cool production, like the song, like The Rolling People. It's got this psychedelic vibe. That reminds me of the Stone Roses in particular, that song. You've got song, like Neon Wilderness, and there's definitely like a psychedelic nature to this, which I do like. There's a little bit of Suede in here, it's kind of interesting sounds, interesting productions that they are doing. And like I said, I should love this album, but I don't. I like this album. I certainly don't want to turn it off, or I wouldn't say that I get sick of it. But it plateaus for me, right? I never get to like another level that I have on plenty of other records. And I don't know. I think you're onto something, John. I think the grandiosity of and the sheer length of this. It's 75 minutes. It's another album that's way too long. You could shave off probably 5 songs on here and probably have a better record. But I was also thinking, like, it also kind of reminds me a little bit of Oasis's. I think it's their third record, Be Here Now, which I don't think we are covering. And that's
we are.
Oh, we are. We're covering Be Here Now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll save more of my take for that. But it's similar in that that's a big album. That's a long record. There's tons of songs on it. And I know people like have panned it or like, oh, Oasis is jumping the shark, what have you. And I like that album. Like I've kind of always, and I'll talk more about it when we get to it. But like, that's an album where I forgive it for being so long and grandiose, because at the end of the day, I really like the songs. Like, I really connect with the songs and I really enjoy them. And so it's not just that for me. It's not that it's just big. I think at the end of the day for me, the songs, they, like I said, they plateau. They get to a level and I'm like, okay, that's nice. But there's something missing. And I don't know what it is, whether it's a big chorus or whether it's a more... I don't know if it's his vocals. I don't think it's that. I think his voice is fine. It's there's nothing wrong with it. But to me, there's an extra oomph that this is missing. And probably in the songwriting, musically speaking. I'm not really speaking about the lyrics. I'm talking about just what it does musically to me. Whereas Bittersweet Symphony and Sonnet definitely rise above that. I think to me that they're just stronger songs. And like, I find myself grooving. Like, I think that's part of it, right? If you play this record, if you play any record really, and you find yourself just naturally gravitating towards bobbing your head or moving a little bit or just like vibing, you could be doing something else, right? You could be at work, you could be doing something in the kitchen or just whatever, but it's there and you're kind of feeling it like innately. This doesn't really do that for me. This kind of fades to the background a little bit, although being a pleasant, nice listen. I want to like this more. I feel like, man, I should be getting to this next level. I feel like this has all the elements that I should like, but it is missing in some way. And I wish I could pinpoint it more. The only thing I can come up with really is there's something about the songwriting that just doesn't, or maybe it's the production. I don't know. Maybe it's that, or the instrumentation, but there's something a little bit missing here. But having said that, like you said, John, I do like this record. I think that there's plenty here that's nice. I don't think there's any song on here that makes me go, ugh, like, stop, right? It's nothing like that whatsoever. It's just, I want to like this more. and I kind of like I'm hearkening back to the Tool record that we covered. I think I like this better than Tool because I think as a genre, this is more something that, I connect with, this kind of Britpop, psychedelic, type thing, rather than like the metal or the prog metal that Tool is doing. But it's a similar thing in the sense that like, there's lots of elements in here that I like, but it just, the whole doesn't match up to all the parts, I think, at the end of the day. So thumbs up. But yeah, I was hoping to, the more I listened to it, I still felt the same way. So it's kind of the opposite of what my experience was with Blur. So thumbs up, but definitely similar to you, John. It's just, it doesn't do it for me as much as I would like it to.
Yeah. I have similar feelings. I think for me, when I was listening to it, I kept hoping, almost right from like after, 3 or 4 songs, maybe, I was like, I kept hoping that it was going to go into another gear or another kind of tenor or range. And it just kind of, like Matt said, it plateaued and never really stayed. It felt so like formulaic, and every song kind of felt constructed the same, and the delivery was the same. The thing that he does with his vocals and like the distortion or like the echoey kind of like production sound that he does on his vocals, that's persistent on every song. It doesn't deviate. There's not a lot of range of emotion in the songs. I think everything is produced in a way that kind of I don't know, like feels like diminishing returns to me, or kind of like squashes everything so that there is no emotion. There's a detached nature to his writing or the band's music that kind of turns me off as well. And ultimately it just felt like this album is like an embodiment of like dysthymia or something. I just felt like this kind of like low level stuckness throughout the entire listening experience that like I never got out of, and like couldn't figure out like you guys both said, like, why don't I like this more? What's going on that like I can't it's like not hooky enough. It's just like not enough of whatever it is I'm looking for. I think the kind of production nature too, with adding the strings and the feel that every song has this kind of like orchestral nature to it, and also is echoey, that I found like kind of wore on me. And then ultimately, like, I just don't think it's like a strong enough album to be the length that it is. And I think the songwriting or the music is just not up to snuff. I felt like after 5 songs, I was like, okay, I get this band. And then I didn't feel like, with maybe the exception of Lucky Man towards the end of the album, like there wasn't like a pop or an excitement to continuing to listen to the band. I like you guys, I think there's just an X factor missing that like some of the other British bands that we've listened to have, or an energy that was missing mainly that I was looking for. And this band just doesn't have it. I felt this way about other bands. I couldn't think of any off the top of my head right now, but bands that we've talked about, I felt the same way about, that like I can respect, but they just never took it to a level that I appreciated or warming. So it's a real thumbs in the middle album for me. I gave this album like 3 listens as well to try and like figure out what is about it, but I just couldn't get excited about it, and there was always something missing from me. So yep.
Interesting.
Well, here I thought I was going to get a new take, and you guys ended up giving me the same take 3 times, which is fascinating.
I thought I was going to be in the minority. I thought you guys would like it or something. So it's always interesting how it works out that way.
I think my takeaway is they should have been a shoegaze band. They should have stayed in that lane and just been there.
So
yep.
Yeah, maybe that's why I don't like it. They're like ultimately a shoegaze band.
But they aren't, because if they were, I think we all know Matt and I would have been like strong thumbs up, since that's like basically our inert position. So yeah. So,
I'll tell you what, in retrospective reviews, man, there's 5 stars all over the place here.
I know.
A variety, yeah. And,
we may be in the minority, but
But as you know about me, Matt, Like I am more than happy to like go against beaten wisdom if I can't get to it. You know what I mean? I'm not going to make it work if it doesn't happen. So, and since we're all there, we might be on to something too. So who knows? But maybe we'll be on to something next episode.